Hello, everybody. So, this lecture is on social stratification. On every slide, I've included a link, a video link, that's going to have me explaining some of the material in a little bit more detail. Make sure you click on the link to get more information about each slide as we go through. I'm trying to, as much as possible, approximate the lecture in class. So, let's start with social stratification. The next three lectures, social stratification, gender stratification, and race and ethnic inequality or stratification, are going to involve systems of inequality. So today we're going to start talking about inequality based on class, income, and wealth. That's what social stratification is. So first of all, social stratification is defined as a system by which society ranks categories of people in a hierarchy. What does that mean? Well, when we rank something in a hierarchy, we have it in a vertical structure. And what we have, for instance, when we talk about social stratification, we have at the top of that structure, the wealthiest, and at the bottom, the poorest. So what you have is a system in which there are levels, and in between those levels is inequality. And this time, we're talking about inequality based on income, class, and wealth. Now, it has four basic principles. You'll see me glancing to my right every now and again because I want to make sure I get as much information covered so that you don't have any questions. And if you do, please feel free to email me. Now, the first is this. It is a trait of society, not necessarily a reflection of individual differences. It is part of the social structure. So what does that mean? That means that if someone is poor, they're not necessarily poor because they're lazy, they don't want to take advantage of opportunity, and they just haven't worked hard enough. There are social and structural constraints or barriers in place that keep some people trapped in a cycle of poverty. You have to take into context historical discrimination that has happened over time, where you find people of color in poverty 3 to 4 times the rate that you'd find whites in poverty. Now, that also means that if someone is very wealthy, it's not that they worked harder than everybody else or they're smarter than anyone else. It's not always up to that individual. It's not always up to the merit put forth by that person. Oftentimes, wealth is inherited. And if you want to know what the greatest prediction of wealth is being born into a wealthy family. Secondly, it persists over generations. Just like people inherit wealth, people inherit poverty. And working your way out of poverty is not as easy as most people would like to believe. Third, it is universal, but it varies from culture to culture. What does that mean? In every single human society, you're going to find inequality. But in some countries, the gap between the rich and the poor is even greater because there's no middle class. There's an absence of a middle class. We have a middle class in the United States, but what's been happening to the middle class over the last 40 to 50 years? It's been shrinking. And it's been shrinking because what's happening? Is it because people in the middle are rising to the top or falling to the bottom with income? Well, they're falling to the bottom. So middle class is shrinking because the jobs that put people solidly in middle class are starting to disappear from the employment landscape of the United States. And then fourth and finally, and this is very important to remember, we'll get back to this, it involves not just inequality, but beliefs. It is the way we think. It is perpetuated and supported by ideology. How can you have this type of economic statistic? That 1% of the population owns 80% of the wealth. That means that for every dollar earned in this country, 83 cents is earned by the richest 1%. Now, the only way you could have a lack of distribution of wealth, the only way you can have that level of concentration of wealth is if ordinary, regular people buy into the system. If they believe one day they're going to be rich, if they believe there's nothing we can do to change it, if we don't demand a fair and equitable distribution of wealth, then this type of inequality remains. But we'll get back to ideology a little later in the lecture. So after you listen to this video clip, You can go on to the next slide.